She stepped out of that church at 9:46 on a Wednesday night. Black hoodie, ripped jeans, white trainers, a small black handbag over her shoulder, a carrier bag of food in her hand, bread, tins, essentials, collected from the food bank that operated out of the church on Raglan Street in Coventry. She walked off camera, and she was never seen again. Her name was Reanne Coulson. She was 33 years old. She was a mother of two. She had a twin sister named Kirsten. They shared summer birthdays. She had brothers who called her Ree. She had a young son whose birthday she had never once missed. Until that May. When Reanne didn't come home, her family told themselves there was an explanation. When she missed her son's birthday, they started to worry. When she missed her own birthday on the 17th of June, and the phone stayed silent, and the messages stayed unread, they knew something was very wrong. But here is the detail that turns this story from a tragedy into something that should make you deeply, profoundly angry. On the night Reanne Coulson was killed, a neighbour heard a woman screaming inside a flat on Paynes Lane in Coventry. That neighbour called 999. Police arrived within minutes. They knocked on the door. They were let in. They searched the property. They didn't find her, because while those officers stood inside that flat, Reanne's body was hidden underneath a mattress. The man who had just killed her stood in the doorway, feigned a mental health crisis, told the officers he'd had a really rough day, and walked away. The officers left, and Reanne stayed. This is the case of Reanne Coulson. Reanne deserves more than a missing persons headline. Stay with me for the full story. And if this channel is where you want to hear cases told the right way, hit subscribe for more documentaries like this. Reanne Coulson was born on the 17th of June, a birthday she shared with her twin sister Kirsten. That detail alone tells you something about the shape of her life. Twins share things, birthdays, childhoods, the specific intimacy of having someone who arrived in the world alongside you. Kirsten knew Reanne the way nobody else did. Reanne also had two brothers, Luke and Tom. Her mother was Lynn Sparks. She was a woman embedded in a family that loved her and expected to hear from her regularly, because that was who Reanne was. She was a mother of two. Her young son, whose identity has been protected throughout these proceedings, was the center of her world. Every birthday, every milestone, every ordinary Tuesday. Family who knew her said she would never, under any circumstances, miss her son's birthday. Not without a word. Not without an explanation. Not without letting someone know. That absolute certainty is what transformed her absence from worry into alarm. Reanne's life had its difficulties. West Midlands police and those close to her acknowledged that she led what they described as a chaotic lifestyle, struggling with the kinds of pressures that push people to the margins of a system that doesn't always reach far enough to pull them back. She worked as a sex worker, travelling between Coventry, Atherstone, and Lymington Spa. She was known to be experiencing financial hardship. The visit to the food bank on Raglan Street that night was not her first. It would be easy, and it would be wrong, to reduce Reanne to those details, because she was not a statistic. She was not a cautionary tale. She was not defined by the circumstances she was navigating. She was a woman who showed up for her son, who checked in with her mother, who called her twin on their birthday, who was, in her brother Luke's words, a proper woman. She was also a woman whose lifestyle placed her, on the night of the 21st of May 2025, at a level of vulnerability that a dangerous man would decide to exploit. That is not a comment on Reanne. That is a comment on him. On the evening of the 21st of May 2025, Reanne visited St Mary and St Benedict Church on Raglan Street, a church that ran a community food bank for people in need in the Coventry area. She arrived at 9:44 p.m. She left at 9:46 p.m. 2 minutes inside, carrier bag in hand, heading back out into the Wednesday night. CCTV captured her leaving, walking away from the church, and then nothing. No further camera picked her up. No witness came forward to say they saw where she went. No phone data showed a journey home, approximately an hour and a half after Reanne left that church, at around 11:20 p.m. A man named Mohammed Durnion brought Reanne to his flat in Paynes Lane, near Coventry city centre. Durnion was 42 years old, a labourer, a crack cocaine user. He lived alone in a flat that police would later describe as being in an extremely poor condition. No electricity, items scattered everywhere, a bucket used as a toilet. He had picked Reanne up that night, intending to buy drugs. He was known to her. Within minutes of arriving at that flat, he attacked her. The post-mortem would later find that Reanne had sustained injuries to her head and neck while alive. The judge, at sentencing, ruled that the evidence showed Durnion had strangled her. She had also sustained burn injuries, but those occurred after her death. What happened in that flat on Paynes Lane was heard by someone. A neighbour, living in the flat next door, heard a woman screaming, heard what she described as a sudden, deliberate assault. She called 999. Police arrived within minutes. They knocked on Durnion's door. He opened it. His demeanour was erratic. He told the officers he was having a mental health crisis. He told them his father had cancer. He begged them to leave him alone. He shouted at them, "Please, I've had a really rough day." The officers, concerned for his well-being, tried to persuade him to seek help. He walked off. They forced their way into the flat. They conducted a search. They found no sign of anyone. They left. Reanne Coulson was hidden under a duvet and a mattress in that flat, while officers stood inside it. The man who had just killed her looked those officers in the face and lied to them, and they walked away. In the early hours of the 22nd of May, after the officers had gone, Durnion returned to the flat. He retrieved Reanne's body. He put it into a suitcase. He drove 4 miles to Binley Woods, on the outskirts of Coventry, stopping along the way, the prosecution said, to scope out locations where he might dispose of her on land or in water. In the woods, he dug a shallow grave on a bridleway. He put Reanne in it. He poured petrol over part of her body and set it alight. Then he went home, and he waited. For 5.5 weeks, while Reanne's family held press conferences and sobbed through appeals and held up photographs and begged for answers, she was already in the ground. Already buried in Binley Woods, 4 miles from where she had lived and died, and the man who put her there was walking free. Stay with me, because how they finally found her is something you need to hear. When Reanne failed to come home in the days after the 21st of May, her family did what families do when the silence stretches too long. They reached out. Then they started searching. The missing persons report was formally filed on the 18th of June, nearly 4 weeks after she was last seen. That gap was not negligence on the family's part. It reflected the reality of Reanne's life. She moved between towns. Her patterns weren't always predictable, and for a time there was hope that she had simply gone off-grid for reasons of her own. But she had missed her son's birthday, and then she missed her own. And the silence had a quality that her family recognized as wrong. On the 23rd of June, Reanne's twin sister Kirsten stood in front of cameras and spoke through tears. She said, "Reanne is not only my sister, but my twin sister, a mum, a daughter, and an aunt. Since she was last seen, she hasn't made any contact with us at all." It was our birthday on the 17th of June, something she never misses. She's missed her son's birthday in May, too, which is totally out of character. "Please, if you know anything, help us find her," her brother Luke said. "Ree, if you're out there and you can hear this, please come home or contact Mum and Dad. We're all worried sick. You aren't in any trouble. We just want you home." Their mother, Lynn Sparks, stood beside them, holding photographs of her daughter, sobbing. While they were speaking, Reanne was already in the ground. The investigation that West Midlands Police launched was meticulous, exhaustive, and ultimately decisive. Detectives analysed Reanne's mobile phone data, tracking the movements of her device in the hours after she left the food bank. What they found was that the phone's location data matched, almost exactly, the movements of a silver Audi car registered to Mohammed Durnion. Her phone had travelled with her body. It had gone where he went. It had been to Binley Woods. That phone data, combined with CCTV footage placing Durnion's car in the area and the 999 call from his neighbour, began to build a picture that pointed in one direction. On the 22nd of June, a 53-year-old man known to Reanne was arrested on suspicion of kidnap and murder. 2 days later, on the 24th of June, Mohammed Durnion was arrested on suspicion of murder. While in custody, something unexpected happened. Durnion broke down. He told detectives he would take them to where Reanne was. On the 27th of June, 2025, 5.5 weeks after Reanne had last been seen walking away from that church, officers followed Durnion's directions to a bridleway in Binley Woods, and they found her. Reanne Coulson was 33 years old. She was found in a shallow grave, 4 miles from the flat where she had been killed, in a part of the city she may never have chosen to visit, buried by a man who had then gone home and waited, who had watched her family appeal for answers on the news, who had said nothing until he didn't anymore. At trial, Durnion did not simply deny what he had done. He constructed a version of events designed to paint Reanne as the architect of her own death. He said she had died of a drug overdose, that it was an accident, that he had panicked, and the question the jury had to answer, over more than 10 hours of deliberation across 4 days, was whether they believed him. Stay with me. Mohammed Durnion's trial opened at Warwick Crown Court in March 2026, 3 weeks of evidence. A jury that would deliberate for more than 10 hours across 4 days before returning their verdict. The prosecution's case was clear. Reanne had been attacked in that flat. She had been strangled. The evidence from her body, the head and neck injuries sustained while she was alive, combined with the neighbour's testimony, the 999 call, the phone data, the CCTV, and Durnion's own behaviour in the hours that followed, told the story of a killing. Durnion's defence told a different story. He said he had picked Reanne up to buy drugs. He said he had taken, in his own words, stupid amounts of cocaine that night. He said they had argued at the flat. He said Reanne had overdosed. He said he had panicked, afraid of what it would look like, afraid of the police, and had made the catastrophic decision to conceal her death rather than call for help. He was not responsible for her death, he said. He was a man who had made terrible decisions in a moment of panic. The prosecution addressed this directly. They pointed to the neighbour who had heard what she described as a sudden and deliberate attack. Not an argument, not a collapse, an attack. A woman screaming, then silence. They pointed to the body-worn camera footage of Durnion at his front door, sweating, flustered, performing a mental health crisis for officers who were standing meters away from the woman he had just killed. They pointed to the petrol, the fire he set in those woods. That detail is not the behaviour of a man who panicked. It is the behaviour of a man who was destroying evidence with deliberate intent. The jury convicted Durnion of manslaughter. They acquitted him of murder. The distinction matters, and it is the detail that has caused the most discomfort in the aftermath of this verdict. Murder requires proof that the defendant intended to kill or cause really serious harm. Manslaughter does not require that level of intent. The jury, by convicting Durnion of manslaughter rather than murder, concluded that while he had killed Reanne, they could not be certain beyond reasonable doubt that he intended to cause her really serious harm. For Reanne's family, who had sat through 3 weeks of trial, who had heard the neighbour's testimony, who had watched the body-worn camera footage, that distinction was a difficult one to hold. The CPS prosecutor, Giovanni D'Alessandro, said after the verdict, Mohammed Durnion killed Reanne and then tried to dispose of her body to escape justice, and Adam Moore helped him do it. At no point did either of them show remorse or take accountability for what they had done. Instead, they forced Reanne's family to sit through a trial and relive every detail of what happened to her. Adam Moore, Durnion's friend, the man who had helped him dispose of Reanne's body in Binley Woods, was convicted of assisting an offender. He had claimed he went to the woods out of concern for Durnion's mental health. The jury rejected that. On the 26th of March 2026, Judge Christina Montgomery KC sentenced Mohammed Durnion to 18 years in prison for the manslaughter of Reanne Coulson. Adam Moore was sentenced to 6 years for assisting an offender. The judge addressed Durnion directly. She said that Reanne had been deeply loved by her entire family, that she was someone who helped others without hesitation, that Reanne had been a woman of warmth and loyalty and care, And then she looked at Durnion and said, "You showed total contempt for her in life and in death." Total contempt. He had put her body in a suitcase. He had driven around the city with it. He had scoped out locations, on land and in water, to dispose of her. He had set fire to part of her. He had buried her in the ground. He had stood in front of her family's appeals on the news and said nothing. He had sat in a courtroom and constructed a version of events that blamed her for her own death. Total contempt. Reanne Coulson was a mother who never missed her son's birthday, until the night a man decided that her life was worth less than his freedom. She was a twin sister, the other half of a pair that had shared everything since the moment they arrived in the world. She was a daughter whose mother stood in front of cameras sobbing with photographs, begging for someone to bring her home. She was a woman who collected food from a church on a Wednesday night and walked off a CCTV frame into darkness. She deserved to walk home. She deserved to see her son grow up. She deserved better than a suitcase and a shallow grave in Binley Woods. Durnion will serve a minimum of 18 years. He will be in his 60s before he is considered for release. Reanne will never see any of the years he gets to live. And somewhere in this city, her son is growing up without her. The case of Reanne Coulson is not a case about a missing person. It is a case about a woman who existed on the edges of the systems that were supposed to keep her safe, and who paid for that with her life. It is also a case about what happened when those systems came close. When a neighbor called 999, when officers arrived within minutes, when the answer was right there, under a mattress in a flat in Paynes Lane, and the man responsible looked those officers in the eye and sent them away. The question of how we protect women like Reanne, women whose vulnerability makes them targets, women who interact with dangerous people out of necessity rather than choice, women who have people waiting for them at home, is a question this country is still not answering properly. If this story moved you, share it, because Reanne's name deserves to be said by more people than watched that press conference, because her family deserves to know she isn't forgotten. Subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications. We go deep on every case, the ones that make the front pages and the ones that deserve to. Leave a comment below. One question: do you think 18 years was the right sentence, or did Reanne deserve more? I'll see you in the next one.